Elena Vance, 30 years old, pulled into the parking lot of the lakeside restaurant with a red warning flashing across her laptop screen. Just before her parents' anniversary party was about to begin, her company's data system stopped responding. While the entire family waited to take pictures, Elena sat inside her car, restored the servers, and prevented an outage that could have locked thousands of customers out of their accounts. No one knew she had just saved the company from a crisis. All they knew was that Elena was late again. When the screen finally turned green, she closed the laptop, glanced at herself in the mirror, and picked up the gift box from the back seat. Her white blouse was wrinkled at the elbows. Dark circles showed beneath her eyes after too many nights spent monitoring the system. She stepped toward the garden, glowing beneath warm golden lights. Imported roses covered the walkway. Thomas Vance stood in a new golf outfit, talking about the years when he had worked as a human resources manager, as though everyone were still waiting for him to make the final decision. Martha Vance moved from table to table, adjusting every flower arrangement so that no detail could ruin the photographs. When Chloe raised her glass, the entire lakeside garden immediately fell silent. The hanging lights shimmered across the water, the band lowered its volume, and Martha quickly signaled for the cameraman to point his lens toward her youngest daughter. This was the moment she had been waiting for all evening, the perfect toast to complete the perfect party. Chloe smiled, adjusted her hair, and began with sweet words about love, sacrifice, and her parents' 30 years of marriage. The guests listened closely. Thomas sat straighter in his chair, one hand resting on his gold-plated watch, as if it were a medal awarded to a successful father. Then Chloe's tone changed. She said she was grateful that her parents had taught her how to enjoy life, how to dress well, travel far, and avoid turning her youth into endless nights spent staring at a screen. She gave a small laugh as she mentioned people who earned plenty of money, but always looked miserable, dressed plainly, and calculated every bill as if bankruptcy were right around the corner. A few guests laughed. Their eyes instinctively shifted toward Elena. Chloe did not need to say her sister's name. Everyone understood exactly who she meant. Elena remained seated. The food in front of her had barely been touched. Julian felt her hand growing colder beneath the table. He reached over and held it, but Elena did not react. She had heard comments like these too many times before. The only difference was that this time, they had turned her sacrifices into entertainment for dozens of people. Thomas laughed loudly and said Elena was only good at tapping away on a keyboard, and that the eldest daughter in a family was supposed to know how to manage things and carry the burden. He even joked that without her family helping her spend her money, she would probably grow old and die alone in her tiny apartment, surrounded by spreadsheets. The laughter rose again. Martha did not stop her husband. She simply reminded Chloe to move closer to the flowers so the picture would look better. Julian looked at Elena. The sadness had disappeared from her eyes. Her exhaustion was gone, replaced by a cold, piercing clarity. He pulled out his phone and sent her a single message. "You do not owe them a magnificent life built on lies." Elena read the message and looked around the table. She saw the watch on her father's wrist, Chloe's dress, the imported flowers, the expensive bottle of wine, and the specially printed menus. Every object in front of her was tied to a night she had stayed awake, a vacation she had canceled, or a savings account she had been forced to drain. Suddenly, she understood that the problem had never truly been the money. The problem was that her entire family believed her labor belonged to them. Elena stood up. The chair scraped across the stone floor with a sharp cutting sound. She picked up her water glass and tapped it gently. Not hard, not angrily, but loudly enough to silence every voice. Chloe stared at her with irritation, as if Elena had just interrupted her performance. Elena thanked her sister for such an honest speech. Then she said there were a few details that needed to be added so the guests could understand who was actually financing that supposedly admirable lifestyle. The smile froze on Martha's face. Elena explained that the European vacation had not been fully paid for. The deposit had come from her card. The luxury car Thomas was driving still had more than 2 years of payments remaining, and the monthly installments were being withdrawn directly from her account. Chloe's credit card was not unlimited. Elena had simply been quietly paying off the balance before the bank could send a warning. The entire table fell silent. Thomas's face turned red as he ordered his daughter to sit down. Martha looked around the garden, more frightened by the guests' stares than by anything Elena had just revealed. Chloe gripped her wine glass and hissed that Elena was humiliating the entire family. Elena calmly replied that she was merely returning the truth to its rightful owners. Then she placed 3 additional credit cards on the table. Starting the next morning, every account limit would be frozen. There would be no more money for travel, no more car payments, no more emergency transfers at the end of the month. Thomas sprang to his feet, but the glass in his hand slipped onto the stone floor and shattered. Elena looked down at the broken pieces near his shoes and delivered her final words. "From this moment on, I am officially bankrupt to every one of you." She turned and walked away. Julian followed at her side. Behind them, the party remained brightly lit, but the glamour surrounding the Vance family had gone dark. Chloe Vance stood among the guests, slowly turning in her custom-made silk dress so the camera could capture her from the perfect angle. The 25-year-old called herself a lifestyle expert online, even though most of the bills for that lifestyle were sent directly to Elena. Martha was the first to notice her eldest daughter. She did not ask whether Elena was tired. She looked at her watch and criticized her for arriving nearly 20 minutes late. Elena did not explain. She was used to having everything important in her life dismissed as an excuse. She placed the gift box on the table. Inside was a high-quality therapeutic massage device, the kind Thomas had mentioned after spending sleepless nights with severe back pain. Elena had spent weeks choosing the model that would suit him best. Thomas opened the box, glanced at it, and said it was too bulky. Martha immediately told a member of the staff to move it to a side table so it would not ruin the pictures. Moments later, Chloe approached with a small box wrapped in metallic paper. Inside was a gold-plated watch. Thomas immediately fastened it around his wrist. Martha applauded. The guests expressed their admiration. Chloe smiled brightly for the camera. No one knew the money used to buy that watch had come from the amount Elena transferred to Chloe the previous week, after her sister claimed she urgently needed to pay for health insurance. Julian stood beside Elena and watched in silence. He was the only person who noticed her hand tightening when Chloe said the gift proved that she always knew how to make their parents happy. During dinner, the conversation shifted to the upcoming trip to Europe. Martha wanted a hotel room overlooking the main square. Thomas wanted to upgrade their airplane seats. Chloe suggested extending the trip so she could create more online content. They discussed every expense, but no one asked whether Elena agreed, because in their minds, she would pay for everything. Elena sat quietly, listening as the cost of flights, hotel rooms, transportation, and shopping was gradually added to her future. Her small apartment still carried a mortgage. Her savings never had enough time to grow. Every month, her salary flowed into other people's accounts so quickly that she could no longer remember the last time she had bought something for herself. Martha said the eldest daughter had a responsibility to carry the family. Thomas nodded as if it were an unbreakable family law. Chloe had already started choosing restaurants in Paris. Julian looked at Elena. He said nothing, but she understood the meaning in his eyes. Amid the laughter and the lights reflecting across the lake, something inside Elena changed. For the first time in years, she was no longer calculating how much more money she would have to transfer. She was calculating how to shut everything down. The next morning, Elena woke before her alarm. The apartment was silent, but the phone on the table kept vibrating like something trying to break free from the glass. More than 30 missed calls, 17 messages from Chloe, 6 from her mother, 4 voicemails from her father. Not one of them asked whether she was all right. Every message asked when the cards would be turned back on. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, watching the screen light up and fade to black. The first thing she felt was not relief. It was guilt. An old guilt that had been fed for years by lectures about family responsibility, devotion to one's parents, and the duties of the eldest daughter. Julian placed a glass of water in front of her. He did not tell her to be strong. He simply sat beside her, close enough for her to understand that this time, she did not have to face everything alone. Chloe's first message was an accusation. The next was a threat. By the 10th message, her younger sister said the bank had sent an overdue payment warning. By the 15th, Chloe declared that she would run away from home. Her final message contained only one sentence: "If my life is destroyed, it will all be your fault." Elena's finger froze above the screen. The words struck the most vulnerable part of her. For years, Chloe had known exactly how to turn the consequences of her own choices into her sister's responsibility. An overpriced handbag became an emergency. A vacation that exceeded the budget became a career opportunity. An unpaid bill became proof that Elena did not love her family. This time, Elena did not transfer the money. She blocked Chloe's number. Across the city, Chloe stared at the notification saying her message could not be delivered, then threw her phone onto the chair. She had never truly believed Elena would cut off the money. In Chloe's mind, her sister might become angry, cry, or stay silent for a few days, but eventually she would return and pay the bills, just as she always had. Elena's silence frightened her more than any threat could have. Thomas and Martha reacted differently. They did not apologize. They called their relatives. Within days, the story of the party had been completely distorted. Elena was no longer the daughter who had supported everyone for years. She became the ungrateful child who had been manipulated by her boyfriend. Julian was portrayed as a greedy man who wanted control of her money. Thomas told people that his eldest daughter had changed after meeting him. Martha cried over the phone, saying she could not understand how the child she had raised could abandon her parents when they were approaching 60. The rumors spread quickly. One aunt called Elena and accused her of being cold-hearted. An uncle sent a message saying money should never come before family. No one asked how much Elena had paid over the years. No one asked why two healthy adults and a 25-year-old woman viewed Elena's income as shared family property. Elena read every message, then placed her phone face down. She wanted to explain. She wanted to send copies of her bank statements. She wanted to show them every bill, every transaction, and every loan. But Julian reminded her that people who had chosen to believe a convenient story would not suddenly change simply because the truth was presented more clearly. That evening, they began reorganizing the apartment. Elena gathered unopened gift boxes, old bills, and spending lists written during moments of desperation. Julian moved the desk closer to the window. They bought several small plants, replaced the curtains, and turned one corner into a reading space. The changes were small, but for Elena, it was the first time the apartment felt like a home instead of a temporary stop between one family rescue and the next. She opened a new savings account. She canceled every automatic payment connected to her parents and Chloe. She established an emergency fund and recalculated the mortgage on her apartment. For the first time, the numbers on the screen no longer made her feel as though she could not breathe. One night, Elena asked Julian whether she was becoming selfish. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Helping someone meant reaching out to a person who was trying to stand. Lying down so they could step on your back was not love. It was self-destruction. Elena did not respond immediately. Outside the window, the city was still glowing. Her phone was still filled with accusations. Her family still had not recognized what they had done. But inside that small apartment, Elena began to hear something she had forgotten after so many years. The quiet sound of her self-respect returning. 3 months after the lakeside party, Thomas Vance's luxury car disappeared from the driveway. No one had stolen it. Thomas had taken it to the dealership himself, signed the sales documents, and watched a young employee drive it away. The money he received was barely enough to cover the remaining loan and several overdue bills. For the first time in years, Thomas stood at a bus stop in an old coat, without his golf clubs behind him and without anyone left to impress. Martha stopped attending expensive lunches with her social circle. She began cutting flowers from her own garden instead of ordering imported arrangements. Whenever a bank notification appeared on her phone, she still felt ashamed, but that shame was no longer directed at Elena, it was directed at herself. Chloe resisted longer than anyone else. She sold her first handbag through tears, then sold 2 more to pay off part of her credit card debt. Her online followers had no idea that behind the old photographs was a young woman submitting job applications everywhere she could. When she was hired as a sales consultant at a furniture store, Chloe considered it humiliating. But on the day she received her first paycheck, she sat in the break room, stared at the amount deposited into her account, and remained silent for a long time. It was not a large amount of money, but it was the first money she had received in years that had not come from Elena. Elena did not return to her old life. She kept every boundary she had established. Her savings account grew steadily. She began paying off her apartment faster than planned. She slept better, focused more clearly at work, and no longer flinched whenever her phone vibrated near the end of the month. At the company, the data project Elena had quietly spent almost a year building was deployed across the entire system. During a meeting with senior management, her supervisor announced that she would lead a new engineering team and take responsibility for one of the company's most important platforms. The woman her own family had once dismissed as someone who only knew how to tap on a keyboard now held decision-making authority over a system worth tens of millions of dollars. But Elena did not tell her parents. She did not need to use her success as revenge against the people who had underestimated her. Her real power did not come from her new title or her higher salary. It came from her ability to say no without feeling like a terrible person. One afternoon in early fall, Thomas sent her a brief message asking whether the three of them could meet. Elena chose a small coffee shop downtown. She arrived carrying a thin folder. There was no envelope of cash. There was no bank card. Thomas and Martha were already waiting. They looked older than they had several months before. Not because time had passed quickly, but because for the first time, they had been forced to carry the consequences they had always placed on their daughter's shoulders. Martha spoke first. She said they had canceled the trip to Europe and had begun recording every expense. Thomas had taken a part-time job helping with recruitment for a small company. He said the work brought him no prestige, but it had taught him how difficult money was to earn. Elena placed the folder on the table. Inside was information about debt restructuring services, budgeting plans, financial assistance programs, and several job opportunities suitable for her parents. Thomas looked at the documents, then at his daughter. He asked whether that was all she had brought. Elena calmly replied that she would help them find a way to stand again, but she would not pay them to remain on the ground. Thomas lowered his head. A long time passed before he managed to speak. "I am sorry I turned you into the family's cash machine." Martha began to cry. Not loudly. Not to make Elena feel sorry for her. It was the first time she cried because she finally saw her daughter's pain, rather than because she had lost her glamorous lifestyle. Elena did not say that everything had been forgiven. She did not immediately reach across the table and embrace them. She simply said that trust could be rebuilt, but it had to begin with action. Several months later, Elena and Julian stood on the balcony of their new apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. The wind lifted several strands of hair from her forehead. Inside, the small plants had grown, just like the life Elena was rebuilding with her own hands. She understood that boundaries did not destroy love. They only removed the exploitation that had been disguising itself as love. And sometimes, learning to say no to the people closest to you does not mean turning your back on your family. It means finally giving them the chance to grow up. Elena's story reminds us that setting boundaries does not make us cruel, selfish, or ungrateful. Sometimes, saying no is the only way to stop love from turning into exploitation. What would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have cut off the money or given your family one more chance? Share your opinion in the comments, because your experience may help someone facing the same struggle. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories about family, betrayal, courage, and second chances. Thank you for watching.